Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Leader of the House please give us the forthcoming business?
Leader of the House, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do have a supply of throat sweets, should you need them. But I admire your stoicism in doing this. The business for next week will include Monday, the 7th of October, debate on a motion relating to the appointment of a lay member to the Speaker's Committee on the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Northern Ireland Ministerial Appointments Functions No. 2 Regulations 2019, followed by proceedings in committee and remaining stages of the Census, Return Particulars and Removal of Penalties Bill, Lords. Tuesday, the 8th of October, motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Plant Health Amendment, etc., EU Regulations 2019, followed by motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Environment and Wildlife Legislative Functions, EU Exit Amendment Regulations 2019, followed by a debate in government time on baby loss awareness, and that may then be followed by all the necessary arrangements relating to the prorogation of the House.
Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I just acknowledge that the member for Perth and North Perthshire cannot be with us today. Can I thank the Leader of the House for the business and for ensuring that the government complies with the judgment of the Supreme Court, because now prorogation is just 5 days. He could have saved all that trouble, but at least now we have a definitive judgment about the capital A advice that the government gives to Her Majesty using prerogative powers, and they were found to be capital U unlawful. The opposition were asking for Parliament to be prorogued, Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday, so that the Prime Minister could come to the House and account for himself to the House at Parliament at Prime Minister's question time. But no show. He's like McCavity the mystery cat. He's called the hidden paw. But it's National Poetry Day, Mr. Speaker, or maybe in the Prime Minister's case, not so hidden paws. But the Prime Minister, as the Chief Whip, our Chief Whip has reminded us, has only done 1 out of a possible 4 Prime Minister's question time. So, no trade bill, no fisheries bill, no agriculture bill, no immigration and social security bill, financial services bill, all lost. The government simply don't want to do their job and bring their bills back. It's no wonder, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition parties have to seize the order paper. We need to use humble addresses to get the basic documents, the impact assessments. Could I ask the Leader of the House if, as the business is so paucity for next week, could we have our opposition day? The last one was on the 12th of June. Now, Mr. Speaker, the EU Withdrawal Act No. 2 states at Section 1, subsection 4, that the Prime Minister must write and deliver a letter requesting an extension to the President of the European Council. He will know, I'm sure, the Leader of the House, from having read the judgment, that Lord Diplock said this about the government. The government are accountable to Parliament for what they do so far as regards efficiency and policy, and of that, Parliament is the only judge. The government, are responsible to a court of justice for the lawfulness of what they do, and of that, the court is the only judge. So will the Leader confirm that the Prime Minister will comply with the law and that the law officers have warned him of the consequences if he failed to comply with the law? Mr. Speaker, turning to other breaches, the ministerial code, the Leader of the House will know how important it is that the ministers stick to the ministerial code. They must avoid real or apparent conflicts of interest. My honourable friend, the member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport, has asked me to remind the Leader of the House that it's possible that the Veterans Minister may or may not have broken the ministerial code when he hadn't resigned from his job as paid job from a veterans company when he became Veterans Minister. And the honourable member for Bishop Auckland raised a point of order on Monday on a possible conflict of interest. The Leader of the House will also be aware that Crispin Odey, a donor to various parties and people, made £220 million overnight as sterling slumped after the 2016 referendum result. Now, given the government have taken our policy on having 20,000 more police officers and raising the real living wage to £10, will they now support the Shadow Chancellor when he calls for an inquiry into the finance sector, including the regulation of hedge funds? And I hope now, Mr Speaker, that the Leader of the House will apologise to you for what he said in his speech at conference when he accused you of damaging the standing of the House in the eyes of the British public to its lowest point in modern history. Now, the Leader of the House should get out more, because if he spoke to people outside, there are people cheering out there for how you've made Parliament more relevant. This from the person who slandered a good doctor and then had to apologise, slouched on the benches because he felt entitled to, then he had to apologise. And, Mr Speaker, funnily enough, we thought he was one of your favourites, because when he was sitting over there, you always called him before all of us. The Leader has not updated the House on the British hostages held in Iran. These are British citizens used as bargaining chips. Nazanin's health and mental health is deteriorating, as she must consider being separated from Gabriella, as Gabriella may return to school in England. This is cruelty. Could we have a statement next week on what is the government's policy towards protecting state-held hostages? Warm words are not enough. It's time to act. And, Mr Speaker, it is Black History Month. I want to pay tribute to the Right Honourable Home Secretary for her excellent outing at the dispatch box, making history as the first black woman at PMQs. And, of course, Dina... Yes, shut over now. And, of course, Dina Asher-Smith. And she made, the Right Honourable Member made women at the heart of her questions. So I, too, want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Dewsbury, the Honourable Member for Walthamstow, and of course the Honourable Member for Canterbury for their bravery. Black History Month reminds us of their contribution and the contribution our parents made. Our parents had to face terrible racism when they first came here. Racism is pernicious, whether blatant or unconscious. And finally, Mr Speaker, I want to thank you and your office and all the House staff for ensuring that we returned after the unlawful prorogement, so that right honourable and honourable members could rightfully take their place here in the House.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I won't take those in order, because I think it would be sensible for me to clarify what I said about you, because I don't think I've said anything publicly that I haven't said to you before, that I have been one of your great admirers in some of the things that you have done in helping this House hold the government to account, and that is absolutely right and proper. But I disagree, as you know, with some of the decisions made over the last year. What I actually said in my speech at the Tory party conference, that your speakership should be taken in the round, with the bits that I think have been tremendously important, with the bits that I think have not been as I would have wished them. And that is my position, and I think it is respectful to the office of Speaker, and if I may say so, not unfriendly to you personally, and I hope and trust you will take it in that spirit. The Right Honourable Lady had the audacity to say that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, wasn't appearing in front of this House often enough, that he was McCavity. Well, it's a rather odd version of McCavity. My right honourable friend, in the 10 sitting days since he's been Prime Minister, has spent 494 minutes in front of this House. He has been running at an equivalent rate of 49 minutes today. He will be ready to speak to this House after this session has finished. He is speaking at an incredibly dutiful and proper rate, and can be held to account, because in statements, Mr Speaker, you allow considerable latitude, and if I may say rightly, to the questions that are asked. So instead of doing a brief Prime Minister's Questions session, he's done 494 minutes. I don't think anyone can complain about that. As regards the Opposition Day and the Order Paper, I think these two come together. The Opposition, if it wants control of the Order Paper, can have an Opposition Day. It can have it on Monday or on Tuesday for a no-confidence vote. And if it has any confidence in itself, it will do that. Though I was in a toy shop recently with my children, who thought that they deserved some toys, and there was a plastic chicken plucked with no hairs or feathers on it, and if you squeezed it, it made a squawk. I cannot think why, Mr Speaker, but it reminded me of Her Majesty's opposition. Now, the Right Honourable lady also said that the government is accountable to Parliament and that Parliament is allowed to pass its laws, and of course the government is accountable to the court. But, Mr. Speaker, we all serve one higher authority. The courts, Parliament and Her Majesty's Government are all accountable to the British people, and 17.4 million people voted to leave. And whatever laws we passed and whatever court judgments come through, we must remember that it is the people who have the ultimate say, and that is the foundation of our democracy. The Right Honourable Lady then made some points about conflicts of interest. Of course it's appropriate that the Ministerial Code is followed, and it will be. I would say moving from the private sector into the public sector fully is not an always simple thing to do. One sometimes has so many commitments that it's hard to remember all of them. But she then went on to criticise Crispin Odey for making money out of sterling falling. May I remind her that one of the major funders, allegedly, of the Remain campaign, the sort of Ramona funder-in-chief, is one George Soros, who made £1 billion when sterling crashed out of the exchange rate mechanism, which is 5 times as much as Mr Odey has said made. So I fear all she is saying is that Mr Soros is a better hedge fund manager than my friend Crispin Odey, who is a great friend of mine and indeed a supporter of mine. The Right Honourable Lady then made a point about the Shadow Chancellor and whether I'd listened to him. I might listen to him when he apologises to my friend, the Right Honourable Member for Tatton, for things that he said about people being lynched. Until he does that, I think he should sit in shame, not on that bench, but on the steps of your chair, Mr. Speaker, because it is really so shocking that members of this House should call for other members of the House to be lynched, and something I think we should all criticise, and I'm sure that honourable and right honourable members opposite feel that as well. The Right Honourable Lady mentioned, as always, and quite rightly, Mrs Nagari Radcliffe, and as she knows, as I said last week, both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have been in touch with the President and the Foreign Secretary of Iran, respectively, and that is quite right, and this issue must be pushed continually. I wish it were in the gift of Her Majesty's Government to achieve the liberty of all the people who are held illegally, unjustly, improperly by foreign states, but we must push wherever we can. And may I add to the congratulations for the Right Honourable Lady, the Shadow Home Secretary, it is a sign of what a good society we are becoming, that we are now completely relaxed about what race people are when they appear at the dispatch box. And I hope that that will continue. And I absolutely endorse what the Right Honourable Lady said about racism being wrong. It's not only wrong, it is evil. And it is something that we should all wish to oppose and to root out. And it should be a sadness to all of us that the Labour Party is the second party after the BNP to be investigated by the Qualities and Human Rights Commission for its anti-Semitism. That should be not something we use as a party political point, but something that actually is bad news in terms of the body politic generally. And as we come to prorogation, I should very much like to thank all the House staff for the terrific work that they do. It is very impressive, and we rely on all of them and their commitment and their love of Parliament, which I think is something many of us share.